Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to ABN's Jihad Watch program. I am Robert Spencer, and I'm very pleased to have with me tonight one of ABN's favorites, none other than David Wood. David, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. How you doing?
Just great. David, can we see you?
I don't know, can you?
I don't know. I can't. There we go. David, I wanted the audience to see you early on in this show because, Basio, there's terrible feedback on the sound. I can barely speak because I keep hearing all this static. There we go. Thank you. In any case, I wanted people to see you, David, because you're sporting this new Islamic beard, and it's quite intimidating, I've got to say. You look like the master of disaster and the doctor of destruction, and I got to tell you, I'm a little bit scared to have you here with us tonight.
It's not actually a beard. It's just I haven't spoken in about a week and a half, so I haven't shaved.
Well, that's one of the reasons why it's so intimidating. You look like you've gotten one of those patented Grover Norquist 4-day growth razors that always keep the beard just on the edge of coming in. But in any case, we are here tonight to talk about exactly that. Basio, I'm sorry, is there anything we can do about this sound? This feedback is terrible. I do not know, but is horrible squawking as I speak. And that's not just me, it's the sound. In any case, we are here tonight to talk about exactly that, Islamic intimidation. We've heard that Islam is a religion of peace, that Islam is a religion of tolerance. We've also heard that Islam is a religion of war. And we've heard that Islam is a religion of many, many things. One of the things that has been very little remarked upon and yet is no less true than the fact that Islam is a religion of war and subjugation is that Islam is a religion of intimidation. Now, this is a tactic that is very often employed and used in a wide variety of contexts. And we are going to be discussing them on the show tonight. And we want to hear from you about Islamic intimidation. If you are a Muslim who wish to call up and intimidate us with your superior knowledge and your superior wisdom and your superior righteousness as a Muslim, give us a call, 248-416-1300. If you are a non-Muslim and you have a story about Islamic intimidation in all of its many forms, then give us a call, 248-416-1300. Islamic intimidation is a multifaceted, one could even say, if one were an Islamic supremacist, a many-splendored thing. And one of the things that it is was shown to us most vividly this week in a video that has gone, excuse me, that has gone viral around the internet. You can see it easily if you search. I showed it at my website, jihadwatch.org, with a warning. I was going to show it on the show tonight, but you never know who's watching. There could be small children watching. There could be people with weak stomachs watching. And so I didn't have the heart to show it. But it is, of course, the famous video of a man having his heart cut out. And the one who cuts out his heart while calling for the chant of Allahu Akbar is then proceeds to bite the heart while explaining that Allah will defeat the enemies of Bashar Assad, the dog. Now, whatever else this is, it seems to me that this video is an attempt to intimidate those who are fighting against the jihadis who are trying to institute Islamic law and overthrow the Assad regime in Syria, and trying to frighten them into stopping fighting. David, what do you think about that analysis?
Oh, there's no question. And, you know, if this weren't so, horrible and disgusting, we'd have to admit that, Muslims have mastered the art of intimidation. And I'm not just talking about someone eating someone else's heart. Whatever the situation that Muhammad's followers find themselves in, they seem to latch on to the greatest form of intimidation. If they actually have political power in a country, if they actually rule the country, well, then then Christians and Jews have to feel themselves subdued, as Surah 929 commands. If Muslims are fighting against the government, well, they can do things like cannibalizing people in order to intimidate their enemies and make you think twice about ever fighting them. If Muslims want to send a message to a place like the United States, about interfering in Muslim affairs, well, then you've got the World Trade Center. You'll think twice about continuing to interfere in Muslim countries. And even here in the United States, from Muslims who are here, you have groups like CARE and ISNA who want to intimidate anyone who dares criticize the teachings of Muhammad or the teachings of the Quran. And they do that by labeling you a hate monger and a bigot, with the understanding that most people want to be liked. Most people want to be recognized as good people. And so when you constantly call people these vile terms, well, that sends a message to you. Don't criticize Islam, or this is how you'll be treated. So whatever the situation is, there's no shortage of intimidation.
So David, I don't understand why this could be, because after all, we know that Islam promotes tolerance and is open to differing points of view. We're constantly told this by our superiors in the media and government elites. And so why all this constant recourse to bullying? I mean, I recall my dear friend, Bishop Robert McManus, the Roman Catholic Bishop of Worcester, Massachusetts, right after the Boston Marathon jihad bombings, he blamed bullying and violent video games. And yet it seems to me that the bombings themselves are a quintessential example of bullying on a bloody and large scale, of intimidation on a horrific and murderous scale. And so why is it that on so many different levels and in so many different areas, as you briefly delineated just now, why is there so much recourse among Muslims to intimidation?
Well, that's what Islam teaches. I mean, in Islam, the solution for pretty much anything that could possibly go wrong is violence. If you're a woman and you get out of line, well, the solution is violence. If you're a thief, you start chopping off body parts. If you leave Islam, you apostatize, someone has to chop off your head. If you're a threat to the Muslim community, well, some people have to die, and that's where terrorism comes in. But the solution for anything that goes wrong is violence. The only exception to that general principle is when Muslims form a minority. When Muslims form a minority in a country where they could not hope to win a physical confrontation, and then the message is peace and tolerance. But this, of course, according to Surah 328, is taqiyya. It's don't be friends with them, don't be friendly towards them, unless it's to guard yourselves against them. And so what you have is Islam. No matter where it happens to be, true Islam isn't really tolerance. So even here in the United States, where you have Muslim organizations like CARE and ISNA, who aren't going around killing people, not always anyway, it happens, but where they aren't going around and actually trying to subjugate people, they are still, nevertheless, trying to shut down all criticism of Islam. And so the goal is always the same, whether it's the Boston Marathon bombers, whether it's someone eating a man's heart, whether it's CARE or ISNA, the goal is always the same. Stop people from even thinking about criticizing Islam, questioning Islam, interfering in Muslim affairs. The only difference is, what methodology do you use to achieve that goal? And the methodology you use depends on the situation, but that's exactly what we see. We see them carrying out these different methodologies. That's why I said, I mean, it's really, really brilliant strategy, and it works because, I mean, there's only a few people willing to speak out against Islam. I mean, you have almost the entire American government, you have almost everyone in the media deathly afraid of saying anything critical of Islam. And so the intimidation, say what you want, but it works.
Oh, yeah. I mean, here we are, David, you and I and a handful of others. We're the tiny minority of extremists who are still holding out. But David, there's something that you said there that I want to expand upon, that you said that the groups like the Hamas-linked Council on American Islamic Relations and other Islamic advocacy groups in the United States like it, they want to shut down any criticism of Islam. Just so that we're clear, do they do that by means of superior argumentation and carefully reasoned refutations of what we say?
No, and they know they would get crushed, right? I mean, think about this. CARE and ISNA and many, many others really, really disagree with what you say on your blog and in your books. And when I disagree with someone, I want to refute their arguments. That's just natural to me. If I disagree with someone, I want to refute your arguments, and that's what you do as well. Someone offers an argument, you disagree with it, you attempt to refute the argument. And so it would just seem natural to us that if CARE or ISNA or any of these people really want to show that Robert Spencer is wrong in what he's saying about Islam, what he's saying about Muhammad, what he's saying about the Quran, it would make perfect sense to say, Robert, we'd like to get you on stage. You can give your arguments, and we're going to respond to those arguments, but we just never see that. It's always if we can convince people, if we can convince the American public through the media and through politicians that Robert Spencer and Pamela Geller and others are racists and bigots and evil, hateful people, well, they keep people from ever thinking about your argument, because people don't want to listen to a hate monger and a bigot. And so that's what CARE and ISNA do. They shut down the dialogue and the discussion. And just in case people aren't familiar with how this works, Robert, if CARE were to issue a challenge, Robert, we challenge you, come down here on stage, give us your best arguments, and we're going to refute them. Would you have any hesitation whatsoever?
None whatsoever. I'd be there on the earliest flight.
Me too. And I mean, that's so odd coming from a Western tradition where our default mode is, let's get together and have this discussion. And you're dealing with an ideology that cannot interact on that level. And for two reasons. One, because that's not how their prophet interacted. And two, they would lose. They would lose so horribly, and they understand that. And so the goal is to keep people from ever hearing about the problems with Islam, to keep people from ever hearing about Surah 929 or any of the other violent verses of the Quran. Keep people from hearing this, because once people hear it, once people know it, they might start thinking about it, and then Muslims would actually have to defend their texts, and you just can't do that.
Absolutely. And so it seems to me, well, actually, before I get into that, I wanted to say that you were saying before that if you had a disagreement with me, then we would discuss it. And I wanted to remind viewers tonight that you can go onto YouTube and find where David and I did exactly that. We had a knockdown, drag-out, no-holds-barred cage match regarding Did Muhammad Exist?, which is, of course, the title of my last book, actually my book before last. And it was a very interesting debate, I believe, in which David argued that the evidence showed that Muhammad did exist, and I argued that the evidence showed that Muhammad did not exist. I invite you to take a look at that and judge for yourself as to who had the best case. But both of us came not with insults, not with ad hominem attacks, not with claims that the other was a hateful, racist, bigoted Islamophobe or something of that kind, but with reasoned arguments that the other did his best to engage and to refute on the level of rational discussion. This was in sharp contrast, and here's something else I'm referring you to an earlier debate that David and I had with Anjem Chowdhury and Omar Bakri. Anjem Chowdhury and Omar Bakri, of course, are Islamic Jihad leaders. Chowdhury is in England, and Omar Bakri, excuse me, used to be in England until he left the country and then was no longer allowed back. And he is now in Lebanon. And Chowdhury is Bakri's protege, and they were arguing that Muhammad did exist, while David and I argued that he did not. And you can see in that debate that both of these eminent Muslim scholars had absolutely nothing to bring in terms of rational argumentation. They said, of course Muhammad existed because the Quran said so. They never explained why the Quran should be taken as a reliable historical text. They just took that for granted. And they engaged in the usual ad hominem attacks as if we were questioning Muhammad's existence not out of an honest historical inquiry, which I believe ought to be conducted about any historical figure of that significance, but out of hatred of Islam and hatred of Muslims and so on. And it was an interesting contrast. David, when he took the side of arguing that did Muhammad exist, and David, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but am I correct in summarizing that you explained that you were going to show Muslims how rational argumentation was to be conducted, and taking the side that they ought to have been able to take and to argue for themselves?
Yeah, when it came to the debate with Sheikh Omar and Anjem Chowdhury. And let me, as a side note here, I just wanted to point out that notice Anjem and Omar are sort of a big step above groups like CAIR and ISNA, in that they were at least willing to try to defend their views and to try and criticize yours. So they were actually willing to engage in that sort of debate. They couldn't offer a very good presentation, and their argumentation was horrible. But notice it's the Salafis and people from the Muslim Brotherhood who, more than anyone else, compared to Westernized Muslims, are willing to step forward and debate. And the reason is they know that they can defend a lot of their claims with regard to Islam. If you're a Westernized Muslim, you'd lose against us trying to defend Muhammad. You'd also lose against people like Anjem and Omar if you tried to defend your view of what Muhammad taught. You'd get crushed on it, because it would be them quoting the Quran and giving its historical background and so on, and you trying to wriggle out of it and read the Constitution of the United States back into the Quran. But yeah, as far as Anjem and Omar, I don't believe that Muslims can really defend even a basic claim like, did Muhammad exist? I believe I can defend it, and yeah, I agree. People have to look at that. I've seen people on both sides of the issue, but it's very hard. It's because Muslims don't have early material, early sources that to draw from. Is very, very difficult to defend something like that. And so for Anjem and Omar, it was impossible, because they don't really understand the historical method. And on top of that, they don't have any early material. So you have to say something like the Quran says it, and the Quran is the word of God, and we know that because it claims to be the word of God, and it's a miracle. But as far as someone who understands the historical method, they'd have a better chance. But still, yeah, big problem. But notice the point here is, we have a disagreement. Even people who are on the same side of the Islam issue, if we have a disagreement with something about Islam, we will, in a heartbeat, say, all right, bring your arguments and I'll bring mine, and we'll have this out, and then let people decide. And just wonder why Muslims, if they really think they're right, if they really think they're interpreting the Quran correctly, if they really think that you are distorting the text and ripping things out of context, why not step on stage and prove it for once?
Why indeed. But this bespeaks the cold heart of the whole Islamic intimidation problem. And that is that this is a culture and a religion that is fundamentally insecure and fearful, and is desperately brittle and afraid of being exposed. And when you know you got nothing, when you know you cannot defend the assertions that you make, it reminds me of the old joke about the politician giving the speech, and he gets to the notes on the side, and it says, "Argument weak here, yell louder." And so that's what we have in the case of this widespread Islamic intimidation and refusal to engage the non-Muslim opponents and critics of Islamic supremacism, that they don't have any argument. And so they yell louder. They call us names and so on, because ultimately they're fundamentally insecure. They really do know that they have nothing. And so all they can do is resort to intimidation, and then, in the extreme cases, to violence.
Yeah, and you have sort of two really powerful bases for this in Islam. One, Muhammad himself would not hesitate to assassinate critics like Asma bint Marwan and Abu Afak, people like that. People who wrote poems about him. They wrote poems critical of Muhammad, and they were killed over. So you have from Muhammad himself. The example of Muhammad is that you kill people who criticize and question Islam, and you find the same thing commanded in the Quran, in that Muhammad is the greatest moral example. He's the paradigm, according to Surah 33:21. So if you want to look to see how you as a Muslim should live, Muhammad is the example. And what did Muhammad do when people criticized him, wrote poems about him? Well, he killed them, and people wonder today why Muslims will have bloody tantrums over cartoons or Salman Rushdie's satanic verses or a poorly made YouTube video. Well, the reason is that they're following the greatest moral example in Islam. So there's that, but the other problem is that, according to the Quran, anyone who does not submit to Muhammad's decisions without question, is an unbeliever. And just so people don't think I'm making that up, I'll go ahead and read the verse. It's Surah 33, verse 36. It is not fitting for a believer, man or woman, when a matter has been decided by Allah and His Messenger, to have any option about their decision. If anyone disobeys Allah and His Messenger, he is indeed on a clearly wrong path. So a believer is not allowed to question a matter that has been decided by Allah and Muhammad. So if you think about the impact that this has had on Islamic culture for almost 14 centuries now, one, Muhammad is the pattern laid down by Allah. So if you question what Muhammad did or Muhammad's example, you're questioning Allah. But on the other hand, if you do not submit to Muhammad's decisions without question, if you have any hesitation at all, that's a sign of being an unbeliever. And so the result is just absolute resistance to any thought of criticizing or questioning Muhammad's life or teachings, because you're running the risk of entering the apostate category if you do that. And so if you imagine the effect that something like that would have on 14 centuries of Islamic civilization, well, the result we see all around us. Can't deal with questions, can't deal with criticisms, violent outbursts over any form of criticism of Islam, and no real discussion coming from Muslim leaders. And it's a really sad situation.
And you cited Surah 33:36 and said that if there's any questioning of Muhammad or Islam, what's been settled, then you're on the way to the apostate category. Just in case our viewers are not aware, what exactly happens to somebody who is considered to be an apostate from Islam?
Well, according to Muhammad in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim and all of the other major collections of hadith, very clear commands: if anyone leaves his Islamic religion, kill him. Muslims in the West don't want to believe that when people want to rush to the aid of people like Rifka Berry and say, hey, she needs to be protected. People just don't want to believe it. The media didn't buy it. Islam doesn't teach that. Islam doesn't teach that. Well, no, if you don't even bother to look at the text. But if you do look at the text, there's a reason that all four schools of Sunni jurisprudence agree that the penalty for apostasy is death. And the reason is Muhammad clearly commanded it. He commanded it over and over again like a beating drum. And so, think about this. If you are absolutely terrified of saying something about Muhammad, right? You're terrified of saying, I wonder if he is really a prophet. Or I wonder if the Quran is the word of God. Or I have my doubts about whether the apostates should be killed. I'm having doubts about that. Well, suddenly you've entered the apostate category, and now you better repent really quick, because if you don't, someone's coming to take your head off.
So what we have here, it sounds like, is an entire edifice based on fear. That Islam is desperately afraid, in general, of criticism because it knows it can't hold up. And so all the people who adhere to it are kept enthralled to it by the fear of being killed or otherwise abused if they step out of line. And so we have an entire empire of fear. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and that empire wants to expand its domain of fear to include all non-Muslims as well. That's the point of Surah 929, and fighting us until we feel ourselves subdued, until we don't dare question Islam, because we understand will be killed for criticizing Muhammad or criticizing Islam. And, you know, that's the point of terrorism. That's the point of taking a bite out of someone's heart, or of blowing up the World Trade Center, or of labeling anyone who dares speak out against Muhammad and jihad, labeling them racists and bigots and hate mongers, as if to say, hey, you know, killing people over leaving Islam is bad. That has something to do with race. You'd only say something like that if you're a racist. Only a racist would ever say don't kill someone who leaves Islam. But those are the labels, and again, it's always the same goal.
And so it seems like, you know, it reminds me of chapter 8, verse 60 of the Quran, which tells Muslims to employ the steeds of war to strike terror into the hearts of the enemies of Allah and their enemies. And so it's striking fear or terror into the hearts of those whom they perceive to be their opponents is a fundamental objective of Islam. And it's a remarkably sharp contrast to the message that angels give in the New Testament when they come to visit people on earth, like when the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary and tells her not to be afraid. And the message of the Gospels seems to be entirely opposite to this. Instead of to strike fear into the hearts of people, but rather to take it away. And I wonder if that is one of the reasons why Islamic civilization has seen Christian civilization in general as an inveterate enemy from the beginning of Islam.
Well, it has to be. I mean, the values of Christianity and the teachings of Christianity are opposed on many fundamental issues. You can have similarities in that we both believe that, you know, there's a God who created the world and so on, and that we both believe Jesus performed miracles. But when you get down to, I mean, some really core teachings, like according to the New Testament, God loves everyone. That's Matthew chapter 5. Christians are commanded to love everyone so that we can be like our Father in heaven. According to the Quran, Surah 3, verse 32, Allah does not love unbelievers. Allah has no love for unbelievers. And so if Allah has no love for these unbelievers, and even more so, according to Surah 98, verse 6, unbelievers, Christians and Jews who reject Islam are the worst of creatures, or the vilest of creatures. How worthless are we? Allah doesn't love us. He doesn't care about us. We're the worst of creatures. We're lower than dogs. And is it surprising that someone would reach down and rip out a heart and take a bite out of it? Or is it surprising that, I mean, how many cases of Pakistani rape gangs in the UK have we seen? You just had another one out on your blog today. But over and over again, we are seeing just absolute contempt for unbelievers. And it's all just a puzzle to the Western media. It's all a puzzle to politicians. We don't understand why these guys have such absolute contempt for non-Muslims. And you realize that's exactly what Islam teaches. And even though there are Muslims, many Muslims who don't think like that, they didn't get that from Islam. They didn't get God loves everyone and peace and tolerance with everyone. They didn't get that from Islam. They may believe that, but it didn't come from the Quran. It didn't come from Muhammad.
Precisely. Well, that's a good place to take a break. And so we are here with the ABN Jihad Watch program. I'm Robert Spencer, and our special guest tonight is none other than the great David Wood. And we will be right back after these important messages.
Hello, this is Sam Shamoun from the Jesus or Muhammad Show, one half of the team with David Wood. I'm here exhorting my brothers and sisters in the Lord Jesus Christ who've been blessed by the programs at ABN, especially by the Jesus or Muhammad Show, to consider and prayerfully consider to partner with us financially, because as you know, ABN is a viewer-supported satellite station. In order for us to continue to broadcast the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, not just to Christians, but also to Muslims, and not just to Muslims, but to those who are sitting on the fence and are considering embracing a worldview or seeking after God, ABN wants to reach these people, but can only do so with your financial support. So I'm encouraging my brothers and sisters to come alongside ABN and make a financial contribution to continue Jesus and Muhammad and other shows with the purpose of preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, seeing Christians get strengthened in their faith, Muslims coming to saving faith in Jesus, and others turning to Christ as their only hope and Savior. But again, we cannot do this if the support does not come in to continue to broadcast these shows. So would you please consider prayerfully asking God whether He'd have you support us on a regular basis so that we continue these programs and continue to bless the people of God, preach the truth of the gospel to the non-Christians, including Muslims, so that in everything we say and do, that Jesus Christ will be glorified and that His gospel will spread throughout the entire world. Would you please join us financially? Thank you so much.
Good evening and welcome back to ABN's Jihad Watch program. I am Robert Spencer and we are here with the illustrious David Wood, and we are discussing Islamic intimidation, discussing how Islam is essentially an empire of fear held together by threats of violence and by smears of those who dare to step out of line or to question what's going on. Give us a call. Don't be intimidated. Give us a call. We won't hurt you. 248-416-1300. We're not about fear here. We're about open discussion. We're about an honest search for truth. Give us a call. 248-416-1300. David, there is one aspect, well, actually there are many, many aspects, but one aspect for the moment of this Islamic intimidation that we've only lightly touched upon, and that is the intimidation of women. Could you give us a little background on that, please, sir?
According to Muhammad, he laid down various criteria of a good woman. You know, she's pleasing to her husband, she doesn't question his decisions, and so on. But most famously, Surah 5, verse 34 of the Quran, which says that if you fear rebellion on the part of your wife, notice, it's not if she actually rebels against you. It's not if she actually rebels, actually does something. You simply are concerned. You're worried that she might. Well, then you can put her in her place. And so at first you would warn her. You would banish her to beds apart, so you separate from her. And you know, if you're still worried that she's not doing what she's supposed to do, then you beat her. And it's interesting, the historical backdrop of the revelation of this verse, a woman came to Muhammad with a handprint still on her face where her husband had hit her in the face. And Muhammad was going to rule in her favor. So there was going to be some kind of retaliation against the man. I don't know if someone would just, really just slap the taste out of his mouth or something like that, to show him what it feels like. But there was going to be some sort of retaliation. That's when Surah 4, verse 34 came down, giving men permission to beat their wives. And then Muhammad said something very interesting. He said, I wanted one thing, but Allah wanted something else. So Muhammad wanted to support women's rights, but Allah didn't want him to do that. And so it comes down from Allah that husbands can beat their wives. And some of the narrations about this are very disturbing. When Aisha herself, so this is Aisha, the mother of the faithful, brings a woman to Muhammad thinking that he's going to judge in her favor, but we already know Muhammad's position on this. Her husband had actually beaten her so severely that her skin had turned green. And Aisha, who, by the way, is my favorite character in all of the Muslim sources. I love Aisha because she's a habitual trash talker. She says, look, her skin is greener than her clothes, right? Her skin. So the woman had on a green dress, a murt. And Aisha says her skin is greener than her clothes. Aisha also said something very, very interesting. She said, I have not seen any woman suffering as much as the believing women. Now,
David, I got to play Muhammad's advocate here for a minute, because when I talk about Surah 4, verse 34, which you quoted to say that men should beat their disobedient wives, or that any disobedient woman actually should be beaten. The many Islamic apologists come back to me and they refer to a hadith in which Muhammad was using a miswak, an Islamic toothbrush, a twig, and cleaning his teeth, and some of his companions approached him and asked him what they should use to beat their wives with, and he held up the miswak. And so these Islamic apologists have used this to say that essentially the beating is a symbolic thing to show the woman that she's out of line, and you shouldn't use anything larger than a toothbrush.
Well, it's always interesting when I quote a hadith, I get, well, that's a weak hadith, but Muslims will not hesitate to use what scholars would classify as a weak hadith in order to defend a position. But one, think about how illogical this is. You've already warned her, right? You've warned her that she's out of line. Then you've separated from her. And some Islamic commentaries say you actually tie her down to her bed. That's what that means. But even if we go with just what it sounds like it means, you're separating yourself from her. The final step, more severe than the warning, and more severe than separating yourself from her, is tapping her with a toothbrush. That's the final step. No, that doesn't make any sense. So that's one problem with this. It makes no sense in light of the passage. Two, it says you beat them. It says you beat them, or according to Pickthall, scourge them. So this doesn't sound like tap them. You could say that in Arabic, if that's what Allah had meant, you could say, tap them lightly or something like that, but that's not what it says. Three, given the historical background of this verse, a woman had been hit right in her face, and that was justified by this verse. So she wasn't tapped with a muswak. And fourth, what do you do with passages, and this is a reliable hadith. This is from Sahih al-Bukhari, where, again, Aisha brings a woman to Muhammad whose skin was greener than her clothes. That didn't happen by tapping her with a toothbrush. That didn't happen like that, right? Her husband was doing some really bad things to her, and Muhammad's attitude was, you're being a bad wife, you're saying bad things about your husband, so get out of here. And notice, again, Aisha, this is not me, this is not Robert Spencer or David Wood or Pamela Geller saying that the women in the early Muslim community had it worse than other women. This is Aisha, Muhammad's favorite wife, the mother of the faithful, saying that Muslim women had it worse, had a worse life than pagan women. So if any woman out there says, no, my husband doesn't do that, my husband doesn't treat me like that, well, you should be thanking God that your husband has been raised around Western values that don't allow that sort of thing. You should be thanking God that you live in a country that will protect you, as opposed to an Islamic country if they operate under Sharia. What did Muhammad say? A man will not be asked why he beat his wife. You don't even ask why a man beat his wife. It's his right. Don't question him.
Well, David, what about the mother of the believers, or the mother of all trash talkers? What about Aisha herself? Didn't she run afoul of this command as well?
Everyone is beating Aisha. Abu Bakr was beating her, so that's the Muhammad's closest companion and the first rightly guided caliph. It's also her father, but he would still beat her even when she was married to Muhammad. And Muhammad himself, when Aisha snuck out one night to follow him to see where he was going, he came back to the house and realized that she was out of breath and that she'd been out, and he hit her right in the chest. And so, I mean, there's no denying it. If Muslims want to say no, Islam doesn't allow that, or it's just it only allows hitting a woman with a toothbrush. Well, guess what? Muhammad was a horrible sinner then, wasn't he? And so was Abu Bakr, your greatest authorities in Islam.
It should be noted that Aisha said in recounting that story, he struck me in the chest, which caused me pain. And so this was no symbolic tap. He caused her pain. And this is, of course, the woman who had also said, as you noted, that she had not seen any women suffer as much as the believing women suffered. That is, as much as the Muslim women suffered. And so then this begs the question, if this is also an empire of fear in which women are captive and are bound by this intimidation, by this violent threat that they'll be beaten if they get out of line, then why do Western women convert to Islam?
Well, Western women convert to Islam for the same reason that anyone else in the West converts to Islam. Misinformation, right? So people hear every day of their lives, every time you turn on the television here in the United States, we hear criticisms of Christianity, why it's dumb to be a Christian. But we hear nothing but praises about how wonderful Islam is. And when a Muslim preacher comes into an area, he doesn't tell the truth about Islam. He doesn't come up to a woman and say, hey, let me tell you what Islam says about you. Let me tell you how you are the property of a man, that he can approach you any way he wants for sex, and you are not allowed to object. He can have more than one wife. He can have slave girls. He can beat you if you get out of line. And even in paradise, you want to know what you'll be doing in paradise if you make it there, since most of the inhabitants of hell are women. Even if you make it to paradise, you'll be sitting in a corner waiting for your husband to come and enjoy you. Of course, he has 72 specially designed sex machines, so he's probably not going to be focusing much attention on you, let's face it. They don't come with that. They don't explain that. They say, no, Muhammad was a champion of women's rights. Muhammad was practically the greatest feminist who's ever lived. They say things like this. And women think that this is true because, we tend to think that when people are telling us about their religion, they're telling us the truth. But it's the same pattern. Islamic preachers, they sort of look for what people like. And then they say Islam is that. So you like peace and tolerance? Oh, Muhammad was a champion of peace and tolerance. You like science? The Quran is a scientific masterpiece. Tons of scientific insights, well ahead of its time. You like women's rights? Muhammad was a champion of women's rights. Whatever you happen to like, that's what Islam becomes. And it doesn't even occur to some of these people, hey, we need to go and look this up and make sure before I convert to this religion, which threatens to kill me if I leave it, I might want to take a look at it a bit more seriously.
That's a very excellent point. And unfortunately, because of Islam's doctrines of deception, which we can discuss another day and no doubt have in the past, this deception is considered to be entirely acceptable, even meritorious under some circumstances, and then these people get in and it's too late. We have a caller, and so you are on the line. Caller, hello. Are you there?
Hello.
Welcome to ABN.
Hello. Good evening, Robert.
Good evening.
Yes, and David, good evening.
Hi,
and I would like to point out on your subject of the Islamic intimidation, in my opinion, what we're looking at is 857.
857?
Al-Anfal.
You mean a Quran verse? Well, you actually stumped the panel. I got to look that up. 860, I know.
Well, it's to kill those in the front line so horribly that you frighten those behind them.
If you meet them in war, Make of them a fearsome example for those who
Exactly.
follow them, that they may be admonished. Oh, that's very good. Hey, what's your name?
My name is Jim, and I'm the one who called last night and talked to you.
How are you, Jim? Thanks
I'm
for calling
doing fine.
again.
I'm doing fine. And I'm going to call Mr. M and ask him if he really believes that.
I'm sorry, couldn't call who?
Mr. Medved.
Oh, well, good luck
Say,
with that. I'm
do
very
you really
surprised to
believe
hear
that?
he said that, but that was yesterday. In
That
any
was
case,
yesterday, yes. And another verse on this intimidation would be Al-Tawbah, or 9, Surah 9, verse 120,
yeah.
which says to raise the ire of the infidel or the kafir is a brownie point in Allah's sight.
It did
No
not
good reward.
behoove the people of Medina and the Bedouin Arabs around them that they should refrain from accompanying the messenger of Allah. Is this the one you had in mind?
It certainly is.
Okay.
Prefer their
and
life
stay
before
behind
his.
and prefer their own security to his. For whenever they suffer from thirst or weariness or hunger in the way of Allah, and whenever they tread a place which enrages the unbelievers, whenever anything of this comes whenever anything of this comes to pass, a good deed is recorded in their favor. So, excuse
Exactly.
me for excuse me, but I'll try to, without coughing, say that again. Whenever they tread a place which enrages the unbelievers, whenever anything of this comes to pass, a good deed is recorded in their favor. That's very illuminating in light of the insults and abuse that they constantly hurl at those
Right.
who are critics of Islamic supremacism and jihad. Obviously, they're trying to get us angry. And
Right, and
I
going
can't
back-
say that, I cannot say, unfortunately, that they have never succeeded in my case, but I do know that once I realized that that was indeed a tactic, then it was not, then they got no more victories out of me on that basis.
Absolutely.
But you can see them trying to do it in many of the debates that I have had with Muslims that you can see on YouTube. And so thank you, Jim. That's a very excellent observation.
Right.
David,
I just want
do
to
you
say
have
that
anything?
857 is definitely will make a man bite a man's heart in front on for YouTube
Oh,
or whatever
yeah.
it was.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. David, you have any comments, sir?
Yeah, when you mentioned 857, I actually thought of 957, which is very interesting as well. I think it ties in when it's read with the prior verse. So 956 to 957, I think it adds an important point. It's talking about some people who are pretending to be Muslims but aren't really Muslims. And so the question is, why are they pretending to be Muslims? So this is 956 to 57. It says, and they swear by Allah that they are most surely of you, and they are not of you, but they are a people who are afraid of you. So people are pretending to be Muslims, saying we are of you, when they are not of you. And why are they doing that? They are a people who are afraid of you. They're pretending to be Muslims out of fear. Next verse, 57. If they could find refuge or a cave or a place to enter into, they would certainly have turned thereto, running away in all haste. Now think about this. This is saying, this is after Muhammad has conquered Mecca. And he's told there are people here who are pretending to be Muslims or pretending to be converts, not because they want to go on a killing spree and kill a bunch of Muslims. It's because they are afraid of Muslims, and if there was a place for them to run and hide from the Muslims, they would do that, but they don't have anywhere to get it. They're not able to get away from the Muslims, and so they have to pretend to be Muslims for their own safety. Now, this is never the picture of Islam that you'd get from Muslims living in the West, where it's all peace and tolerance. Here you have people pretending to be Muslims out of fear, terrified, and if they had another alternative, they would rather go live in a cave than to be living under Islamic rule, but there's no place to flee, and so let's just pretend to be Muslims. Really, really powerful stuff here in the Quran.
Absolutely, David, and thank you. These are all very important verses because they do situate, as Jim pointed out, why somebody would cut out someone's heart and bite it so as to present such a fearsome example that the other enemies of Allah, or perceived enemies, would be afraid to continue. And the other verse, that was 857, and the other verse, 9:120, exhorting the faithful to do things to enrage the unbelievers. And then David adding that these things all are designed to terrify so many people that there are even people who pretend to be Muslims for fear of retribution if they were not. And I think that's probably the case, excuse me, for many people in the Muslim world. I've heard from many people that there are not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of people who have left Islam, most of whom who have converted to Christianity, but they do so in secret because of Islam's apostasy law. And so they are, in a sense, the living embodiment of this verse 9:120. Not 9:120, the 9:56 and 57 that you just quoted, David, that they're pretending to be Muslims out of fear. Do you think that that is a correct assessment?
Oh, there's no question, and that's one of the reasons that that Islam has expanded up to a point is any ideology which says you can come in but you can't get out. It's if that ends up with a powerful military behind it, that ideology is gonna spread. So when Muslims say, "Oh, Islam grew so rapidly under Muhammad," yeah, if you've got a bunch of people who are promised virgins in paradise and war booty if they survive the battle, and you can't leave under any circumstances or you'll die, that's something that can only grow.
And not only that, but those who don't come in are subjugated, made to pay a special tax, and subjected to various humiliating and discriminatory regulations that deny them basic rights. And all they have to do to be free from all that is to convert to Islam. It makes for what we know as the world's fastest growing religion. But it does not make for a group of people who are happy and convinced and content with what they're in. It makes for, as we have said already, an empire of fear. So give us a call, 248-416-1300. We are not afraid here, and don't you be afraid either to call us, especially if you are a Muslim and you think, well, wait a minute, I'm serene and happy in my Islamic religion, and I don't fear anything, especially you kuffar, and so I'm not going to take this talk about being in fear and having to resort to intimidation in order to preserve my religion. Give us a call, and we will joust. 248-416-1300. David, besides the oppression of women, what other various forms of intimidation are there? I mean, I'm giving you a very open-ended question because there are so many. We could just take this in any direction at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've already pointed out the killing of critics. So there's massive intimidation if you dare to criticize Islam. So if you're living in Medina, after several people get killed, you're going to think twice about writing a poem about Muhammad, especially when he's on the rise. His numbers are growing. And you look at how he dealt with the 3 tribes of Jews there. Wow, I better not say anything critical of him. I better not stand against him. I better not do anything. I better be on my best behavior and be tiptoeing around there. And then you see the modern fruits of that. I mean, how many newspapers in the United States published the Danish cartoons, even when they were talking about that, even when they were talking about the Danish cartoons and people being killed over the Danish cartoons? How many people published them as part of the story and said, look, here's what everyone is getting upset about? Well, almost no one. And the reason is they're absolutely terrified. Look at South Park. South Park makes fun of everyone. And even though people's feelings may get hurt when they watch South Park and realize that people are making fun of them, they were sort of equal opportunity offenders. They would make fun of absolutely everyone. They'd attack atheism, they'd attack Christianity, they'd attack everything. Except one, when they finally decided they were going to have Muhammad on their show. And what happened? Well, someone's going to die if you do this, so what do you want to do? And they back down. So it really works. It works with women. It works with unbelievers. It works with the media. It works with politicians. It works with entire governments, even in even in Muslim countries right now. If you think about how these recent events have gone about, I mean, if you're Assad right now, you have to be absolutely terrified. You have to be terrified when you see what's going on, and you see the rest of the world, the Western world, backing these rebels, these pro-jihad, pro-Sharia, heart-eating rebels, and these the Western governments are getting behind these guys. Let's send them money to topple the dictator, because we here in the West we have the mentality: if there's a problem in a country, take out the dictator, and then the people will rise up and they'll form a good government. It worked here in the United States. Why can't it work in the Middle East? Well, there's a reason. There's a reason it's not going to work in the Middle East, because those people are going to fall back on Muhammad's teachings. And I mean, if you think about how all of this ties together, people in the West have been so intimidated and indoctrinated into thinking that Muslims are always the victims, that Muhammad's teachings are good and pure. On the one hand, we want to side with the Muslim rebels because we don't like the evil secular dictator. We want to side with the rebels because Muslims are these good people with good teachings, and we really believe that if they do take over, that they'll form a good government. Why? Because Muhammad's teachings are peaceful and tolerant, as we've all been indoctrinated to believe. And so all of this intimidation ties together in that even as a man is sitting there eating a soldier's heart to send a message to Assad, we're also sending a message to Assad. Your days are numbered. An Islamist government is going to take over right now. It's going to be Sharia. And all of you there, you Christians, you're about to get the short end of the stick.
And the Alawites and all the other non-Muslims, it's worth noting,
including probably Shias. There are plenty of Shias there, but I mean, if Al Qaeda is pouring in, and Muslim Brotherhood it wants a piece of that, it's gonna. Sunnis and Shias, when there are large numbers of each, do not live in peace. The only time Sunnis and Shias, with a large group of each, will live in peace is under a dictator that both sides are absolutely terrified of. And
so we have it again,
we're all confused. We're confused here in the West. Hey, let's go kill Saddam Hussein. Everything will be fine. Saddam Hussein dies. Everything's going to be fine. And then Sunnis and Shias start blowing up each other's mosques. What happened here? Well, the reason they weren't blowing up each other's mosques because they were so terrified of Saddam, who, if you get out of line, he'll roll into your entire town and kill everybody. That's what everyone's that terrified. In fact, this relates to the topic of same thing in Syria. I know in Michigan, I have a friend who's older. I think he's about maybe 60, but he moved here a couple decades ago from Syria, and he goes back to visit. And he said, this is before the Arab Spring. So he told me this probably 5 years ago. He said that he feels safer as a Christian in Syria than he does walking down the streets in Dearborn. Right? Wow. Now think about this, Dearborn, Michigan, right? I walk down the streets in Dearborn, Michigan. You can have occasional problems, but he's saying it's better in Syria. I said, why? I mean, you obviously you can have Muslims get out of line. I mean, it only takes one to come and cause some problems. He said the Muslims there realize if they mess with a Christian, if they go and kill a Christian, there's going to be soldiers coming into their house in the middle of the night, are going to take them out to the public square and shoot them. And so it's you don't get out of line because there's going to be massive retaliation, but it's equal retaliation, right? It's not we're going to favor one religious group that gets to go around and impress and persecute all other groups, and that group is protected. It's any of you get out of line. I don't care if you're a Christian or a Muslim. I'm coming after you, so stay in line. And then we get rid of that. And by the way, I'm not defending Assad or Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi. I don't like any of these guys. What I'm pointing out is sometimes there are worse things in the world than dictators. And if you're a Christian and you're able to live and flourish under a dictator better than you would under the Muslim Brotherhood, then wow, man, it's sad. It's sad that people are really this clueless about what's going on. If you don't learn your lesson about Libya, you don't learn your lesson about what happened in Egypt, well, guess what? Maybe it'll work this time in Syria. And then after it totally backfires and you get a Muslim Brotherhood government in Syria, well, guess what? All these countries are going to recognize this is how you do it. This is how you get rid of the government that's stopping us from oppressing people. And we can get rid of them just by rising up, killing a bunch of people, eating hearts, and the Western media will back us no matter what we do.
Incredible, but they're intimidated as well. It's time for a break, and so we will be right back after this. This is ABN's Jihad Watch program. I'm Robert Spencer. We're here with David Wood. Give us a call, 248-416-1300. We'll be right back after this.
This is Pastor Joseph from ABN. Hey, I pray that the Lord is blessing you already in 2013, and we pray God's blessings on the ministry of ABN as it continues to faithfully preach the gospel of Jesus Christ to the utter ends of the earth. People are getting saved through the ministry of ABN. We receive emails daily from folks in Pakistan, Indonesia, all over the world, the UK, United States of America, through the ministry of ABN. A lot of it is through the internet. Unfortunately, we haven't always been able to reach out in ways that we could, and one of the big things that has hindered us is finances. But ultimately, it's not finances. It's the prince of the power of the air whose area we are invading, with the ministry being beamed to the utter ends of the earth, the gospel message in Arabic, in the Aramaic language, and of course in English with programs like News and Views, Jesus or Muhammad. Yes, that's right, and even Jihad Watch with Robert Spencer. Don't you believe that these premier apologetic programs in the English language to the Muslim world that are saving many, many souls throughout the world, continually saving souls? While I'm asleep at night, people are watching videos of me and Sam Shimon and David Wood and others, and they're coming to Christ through the ministry of ABN. I encourage you to pray. Please pray for this ministry. This ministry needs your help. Yes, we need you to pray for us. We need you to continue to encourage us. And as God prospers you, would you please prosper ABN? Would you please give, even as it's been given unto you? It's more blessed to give than to receive. Wouldn't you please today pray about God showing you, laying on your heart a burden for the ministry of ABN, a crucial ministry, a strategic ministry. And today, with the political climate the way it is, and things taking place throughout the Middle East, and Barack Hussein Obama in Washington, now more than ever, ABN is needed on the front lines. We cannot do it without you. Please pray. Please pray. And as God leads you, give generously to the ministry of the Aramaic Broadcasting Network, ABNSAT.com. God bless.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to ABN's Jihad Watch program. This is the third and final segment with the illustrious David Wood. I am Robert Spencer, and tonight we are discussing Islamic intimidation in all its many forms. Violent intimidation, the intimidation of threats, of smears, of ad hominem attacks, of intimidation against women, intimidation against non-Muslims, intimidation against Muslims who dare to step out of the box and think for themselves. It is a veritable, as we have said, an empire of fear. But you should not be afraid. Don't be afraid to call us, to talk to us, 248-416-1300. We are here. Operators are standing by, and we are ready, especially if you are a Muslim and you are not intimidated, then give us a call. But in the meantime, David, there have been several new acts of Islamic intimidation around the world today. I note that in Bangladesh, a Muslim group has called for killing all of the infidels. I note that in North Carolina, a young convert to Islam, a 19-year-old boy, has pled guilty to trying to join up with Al-Qaeda and to, possessing a gun in order to commit a jihad terror attack of his own. And he had hoped to become, as he put it, a soldier for Allah by killing infidels, as many infidels as he could kill as possible. And meanwhile, also in Iraq, a jihad car bomb has gone off, murdering 33 people. Now, if the Muslim population in the United States continues to rise, we don't see, in general, this kind of thing in the United States on a regular basis, the North Carolina young man aside. But is this what we have to look forward to as being ever more common features of the daily news?
Yeah, this is actually a pattern that goes back to Muhammad. When I said earlier that this is really, I mean, it's diabolical, but it's absolutely brilliant how this works. When Muhammad was the persecuted prophet with only around 100 followers in Mecca, the message was, to you be your religion and to me be my religion. That's what the Quran said during this time. Later, when Muhammad had formed some alliances and he had more followers, suddenly the message changed so that now you can defend yourself. So now you have defensive jihad. When people persecute you or insult you, then you can retaliate. But other than that, you're not going out and trying to violently subjugate people. And lots of Muslims want to pretend that Islam only allows self-defense. But later, when Muhammad and his followers actually had the ability to subjugate people, that's when you have commands like Surah 9, verse 29, fight those who do not believe in Allah, and you have to fight us until we feel ourselves subdued and we're actually paying tribute to Muslims, but we are second-class citizens. So Muslims look back at this and say, Muhammad is the greatest moral example. What did he do when he was in a small minority? Well, peace and tolerance. What did he do when he had larger numbers and could actually defend himself against criticisms and against persecution? Well, he fought. That was the command. You fight. What did he do when he was actually able to go out and subjugate people? That's exactly what he did. And so we look around the world and you see this pattern lived out completely in the world around us. You look at countries like Saudi Arabia, where Muslims are in authority, where Muslims have the majority, or in Bangladesh, as you just pointed out, hey, let's kill these people. You're definitely not going to step out of line. You look at other places, certain areas of Europe, but also many African countries where Muslims aren't the majority, but they have enough to really send a message to people if they disagree with them. Well, here you have your churches getting burned down and blown up and things like that. You have all kinds of riots, but it's clear now we're defending ourselves if you get out of line. And finally, you have places like the United States, go up to a Muslim. What's Islam all about? It's all about peace and tolerance. You have this pattern laid down in the life of Muhammad. You have it in the Quran. You have it in the Hadith. You have it in the commentaries. You see it all around you. You've seen it all through history. And even Muslim scholars will write about these different stages of jihad, and yet you take all the media and all the politicians over here and roll them up into a ball, and they just can't get this. We can't get our minds around how this works when it's so utterly obvious. But why can't people get it? You've been intimidated into not getting it. You've been intimidated into not thinking critically about this and not trying to understand it, because the moment you understand it, you're a racist and a bigot for understanding something.
Absolutely. But wait a minute. I got to play Muhammad's advocate again. You're actually saying that Muhammad is the example for all this, and that the modern-day practitioners of Islamic intimidation, in all its forms, including violence, are actually carrying out, or following, I should say, Muhammad's example. So what about the idea, which is very common in Washington these days, that actually the problem is not with Islam or Muhammad at all, but with Islamists who are acting upon a politicized twisting of the original peaceful teachings and non-political teachings of Muhammad?
Well, the term Islamist, that's just a term to make ourselves feel more comfortable. But the bottom line is people do recognize that there are peaceful Muslims who don't want to kill and hurt anyone, and they see a very big difference between those Muslims and Muslims who are going around killing and trying to subjugate the entire world. And so we say, the peaceful Muslim who goes to the mosque on Friday, but other than that, isn't he's not doing anything that we would notice, except maybe wearing a little kufi on his head. Other than that, we wouldn't notice that he's any different from anyone else. These are the true Muslims, and we want to believe that. Whereas the Muslims who are actually quoting Muhammad's teachings on subjugating people and waging terrorism and so on, they've been radicalized somehow. We don't know how they got radicalized. Must have been a group. Must be that they're poor, even though they're not. But something must have radicalized them. But they're very different. The problem is the people who are trying to subjugate the world, those are the ones who are following Islam. And so it's just it's terms that are invented in order to keep us confused, even if the people who are inventing them are sincere in what they think Islam is. I would, if I got to choose, I would use different terms, because even though according to Muhammad, people who actually want to believe in peace and tolerance, Muslims, those are hypocrites. Those are in the hypocrite category. They're in trouble. Muhammad said, if you stand before Allah and you don't have marks on your body, you have died on one of the branches of hypocrisy. You're a hypocrite if you do not have visible wounds on your body from fighting the unbelievers. So, I mean, all these Muslims in the West who just want to live normal lives and pay their taxes to a U.S. government that's sending armies into Muslim lands, these are hypocrites according to Islam. But we don't want to say that. We want to say, hey, you go to the mosque, you say you believe in the Quran, we're going to call you Muslims. And so what do we call the other groups? Well, they're different from you. They're more radical, so we'll call them Islamists. If I got to choose the terms, I would probably call the Islamists, the one who are actually trying to violently subjugate people and take over governments and waging terrorism and things like that, I'd probably call them just Muslims. But we do need a term to distinguish, some Muslims in the West from that, and I would just call them Westernized Muslims, right? You've been Westernized through Western values. You've grown up around the same values that I've grown up around. You watch the same TV shows that I watched when I was growing up, and so you've grown up with Western values. You still have elements of Islam. You still have Islamic teachings that you believe in. You still believe in praying 5 times a day and things like that. But you've lost your Islamic values, and so we can still call it Islam, but we'd have to call it Westernized Islam. It's been mixed with Western values, and so I'd be in favor of Islam and Westernized Islam, or Muslims and Westernized Muslims. Be more comfortable with that. I think it's more accurate.
Well, then, thank you. That's very insightful, and I think that in the remaining time, we should turn to one of the foremost elements of intimidation of non-Muslims in the Western Muslims' arsenal these days, and that is the term Islamophobia. In the first place, what is Islamophobia, David?
A phobia is an irrational fear. So you can have a healthy fear, but you can have an unhealthy fear. So, for instance, I'm afraid of electricity in a certain sense. I'm not just going to be stupid and go stick a fork in a light socket messing around because I'm not scared of it at all. No, I have a healthy fear, a healthy respect for the fact that electricity can kill me if I'm not careful around it, or fire. I'm not just going to say, hey, I can do whatever I want with fire. Who cares? It can't hurt me. No, it can hurt me, and I understand that. But then you have unhealthy fears, and these are phobias. These are people who become absolutely paralyzed with fear. when they even think of a snake, right? Some people just think of a snake and they'll start sweating. They'll get scared. You show them a picture of a snake, they will be just out. They will lose it. And so some people have these irrational, unhealthy fears that really keep them from living a full life, because they're scared of the dark, or of snakes, or of spiders, or of closed spaces, and it just paralyzes them, their fear. And so basically what you have is homophobia worked very well in certain circumstances, where if you're critical of homosexuality or something like that, you get labeled a homophobe, and that tended to work very well. And so Muslims kind of looked at that and said, hey, it worked well for certain people to use this phobia term. And so let's put together a term called Islamophobia, which is an irrational fear of Islam. And I mean, if you just think about how utterly ridiculous this is, Muhammad says, kill apostates. I don't like that. Well, you must have an irrational, unhealthy fear of Islam. Well, why is it unhealthy or irrational to believe that it's wrong to kill people for leaving Islam, or to beat women who, get out of line with their husbands, or to kill people who criticize Islam? Why are any of these things irrational? These are things that almost every Westerner would agree with. Even most Muslims here in the West would agree with a lot of the same things we're saying. But it's just another tool of intimidation. Muslims aren't in a position here in the West to violently subjugate us. And so they have to subjugate us in a different way. They have to keep us quiet in a different way. They have to subdue us, make us feel subdued in a different way. And you do that by, labeling people as these fearful hate mongers who are just, we're paralyzed. And I don't know if Muslims have noticed, I'm not scared of much, and I don't think you are either, Robert. So what exactly are we afraid of? We're the people, put it this way, people who are afraid of snakes don't jump up in the face of the snake, right? People who have a phobia of spiders don't run up and grab the spider, right?
Yes.
Here you have Islam. We're coming right at Islam, challenging Islam's finest, challenging the best and the brightest that Islam has to offer, and saying, bring forth your arguments. And we're the scared ones here.
Well, don't you think that's kind of a species of projection that we've been talking about, how Islam is so strongly based on fear and on intimidation of those who are within it. And then they project that fear out onto us. And they say that we have this irrational fear, when actually that's what their whole lives are guided by.
Mm-hmm. And there's no question that you have this. You have all kinds of fear. You have all kinds of fear of thinking about Muhammad's teachings critically, fear of thinking about the Quran critically. You also have the fear of the Muslim women, of getting out of line and what could happen to them, and of going to hell because they're getting out of line and not pleasing their husbands enough. You also have almost the entire Western media paralyzed with fear. You have almost all of our politicians paralyzed with fear. The only people who aren't scared at all are people like us, and we're the ones who have the irrational fear. It's strange stuff.
Well, this is the crazy world we live in. I mean, it really is amazing when you noted that most of the newspapers in the West were afraid to publish the Muhammad cartoons, even though when there were blasphemous images regarding Christ, they had no problem affirming the freedom of expression and the importance of the freedom of expression and so on. They were obviously paralyzed by fear in terms of the Muhammad cartoons, and I thought what was most ironic was when, I believe it was Yale University Press, I could be wrong about that, but in any case, one of the university presses, a prestigious university press, published a book about the Muhammad cartoon controversy and actually did not include the Muhammad cartoons in it. They were that afraid. They were willing to discuss the free speech and free expression issues that were involved in the controversy while simultaneously surrendering to those who, with their violent intimidation, had made this an issue in the first place.
Yeah, so we believe in free speech, just not that much, right?
Yeah, not when it might hurt. It's a far cry from the Founding Fathers. You know, the last line of the Declaration of Independence is that, excuse me, to this great cause, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And of course, we have Patrick Henry saying, give me liberty or give me death. That spirit has so much gone out of the American public square at this point. I think that there are very few people. I mean, I think you and I and the handful of others that we work with, David, are people who have pledged our lives and our fortunes and our sacred honor to this great cause. And we are willing to fight for liberty to the point of death. But most, as you have noted, most of the Western intelligentsia, the government, law enforcement, the media elites, they are completely cowed. And they have allowed themselves to be intimidated by this massive empire of intimidation. And it's a shameful situation. In the few minutes that we have left, we have about 10 minutes left, David, and I wonder if you could sketch out some possibilities of how we might try to recover and try to win some ground back in this great battle.
Yeah, well, a lot of people get discouraged, and it can be discouraging when you're doing the right thing. You're speaking out on behalf of people who are oppressed. You're speaking out on behalf of people who are being horribly persecuted. And for what you know is the right thing to do, you're labeled a bigot and a hate monger and a racist. That can be horribly discouraging. But I really think that Islam has spread itself out so thin in terms of truth. They've spread so much nonsense that I think that the field is sort of wide open for someone to keep coming through, to get the facts out there, to quote the Quran, to quote the Hadith, and show people what Islam really teaches. I think if we could reach kind of a tipping point where people open it up and start saying, wait a minute, what actually does this say here? I think that the responses that Muslims have given are so deceptive that as soon as people are able to think critically about Islam for even a moment, I think the whole structure is just going to come crumbling down. So, I mean, at the end of the day, this is a battle of information here, and it's us trying to get factual information out versus misinformation. Us trying to, I mean, it's just crazy. I pointed this out before that, I mean, in one sense, we're defenders of Islam. We are some of Islam's defenders in that we don't believe in Islam. We believe Muhammad's teachings are wrong, but we want people to actually understand what Muhammad taught and not a distorted, whitewashed, watered down version of what Muhammad taught. So in one sense, we are defending Muhammad's teachings from corruption, from being distorted. And I think that even many Muslims in the West, even many Muslims, when they come to understand what Muhammad actually taught, I think that even many Muslims are gonna leave because they would recognize this as wrong. And so it all comes down to actually defending Islam in a really strange way, defending what it actually teaches. If we can defend Islam against reinterpretation in the public square, then when people understand what Islam teaches, I think the media will eventually break. I think the politicians will eventually stop labeling people Islamophobes and so on. All of this is based on some ifs, but I think it's plausible. I think it's plausible that if we get the word out there fast enough, we can reach a kind of tipping point.
I think you're right, David. I absolutely do. I really wouldn't be doing this if I didn't have hope. And the fact is that, sometimes it feels like, as Solzhenitsyn said, that there's the concrete that covers over the earth, but then the blades of grass poke through the concrete. And sometimes I feel like all I am is one blade of grass poking through that concrete, but the blades of grass ultimately win out. And the concrete, however many times people will come and reinforce it, eventually the blades of grass will win out. And the truth will out. I believe in the truth. I know you believe in the truth. The people we work with believe in the truth. And I believe that the truth will out. I'm reminded frequently these days of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And you remember those days, or I don't know, you're far younger than I am. Maybe you don't.
I remember.
In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and it was really a surprise to the world. And as late as 1986, 87, 88, people were talking about having to get used to living with the Soviet bloc for generations, and that this was going to be something that our children and our children's children were going to be dealing with, the specter of Soviet communism. Now, obviously, we're not out of the woods entirely vis-a-vis communism, and there's the nuts in North Korea and so on, but nobody expected that the whole Soviet empire was going to crumble in a year when they were saying that. And yet all the learned analysts, all the Washington experts, they were all saying in the mid-'80s, Ronald Reagan, when he said tear down this wall, was expressing a completely unrealistic hope and one that was damaging to future Soviet relations. And instead, he set in motion by his policies and by his call something that did ultimately end up with the tearing down of that wall. And so I believe that it's the same kind of thing here, that we're telling the truth is obvious, the truth is manifest, it's clear to anyone who cares to look. And so there's no way that they can continue pouring this concrete over us forever. The blades of grass are going to keep on poking through.
No question. And I just want to say, since we're out of time, I've been called many things, but I've never been called illustrious. So, but I like it. I might stick with that one.
Get cards printed.
Yeah.
In any case, this has been the ABN Jihad Watch program. Excuse me. I apologize for the cough. David, it's been great to have you on, as always, and honored that you are here with us tonight. And this is the Jihad Watch program. As I say, I'm Robert Spencer. We have been here tonight with the illustrious David Wood, the master of apologetics. Check out his work at answeringmuslims.com and his extraordinary videos on a wide variety of topics that really do answer pretty much every point that is put forward by Islamic apologists, as well as clearing up many, many other important disputed questions. Answeringmuslims.com. So once again, I'm Robert Spencer, and for David Wood and ABN, thank you, good night, and God bless.